Wonderful. Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, everyone. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our session using the EU Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements to support equitable development and climate resilience. My name is Ardiro Cavada. I am the Executive Director for the GEO for SDG initiative, a global initiative that works across the GEO work program and with stakeholders at the regional, national, and local level to extend the use of Earth observations and derived knowledge to achieve sustainable development around the world in alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I am thrilled to be welcoming you today to our side event. We have a terrific lineup of speakers and panelists from local government, academia, space agencies, the private sector, and GEO work program activities, who will discuss how cities and communities are leveraging Earth observations and derived information to monitor development indicators and deliver more effective solutions in key areas for building community and urban resilience, such as adequate housing, access to public transport, cleaner air, better land use, and a more efficient built environment. Today's session highlights the contributions of over 30 organizations that have been working together to develop the Earth Observations Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements, which we launched earlier this year at the UN Statistical Commission annual meeting. We have two parts in our side event. First, you will hear from a diverse panel that will share perspectives on progress to date and opportunities to work further together to increase the long-term capacity of cities and communities to apply EU resources, such as the ones included in the EU Toolkit, to increase their resilience to pressing challenges like the ones derived from climate change. And second, we will have a number of presentations that will share examples of data sets and EU processing tools that are part of the Earth Observations Toolkit. But first, we will hear from our colleague, Rafael Monge, who is Director of the National Center of Geoenvironmental Information at the Ministry of Environment and Energy in Costa Rica, who will give us a tour of the EU Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. And we may have an issue with the sound, so let's go back to starting the video again and make sure that we have sound.
Donovan, your mic is turned off. If you could turn on your mic.
Perhaps in the meeting platform.
Hello, my name is Rafael Monge, and today I'll share with you a quick tour to the Earth Observations Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. After the end of this talk, you will know more about what you can find there and how you can also be part of this initiative. The EU Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements is an online knowledge resource available at eutoolkit.unhabitat.org that aims to make urban-related EU data easy to find and use, and also help facilitate knowledge sharing, skill building, and collaboration among local communities, cities, countries, EU experts, and different stakeholders from around the world. This project is the result of a collaborative effort between the United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, the Group on Earth Observations Initiative, Earth Observations for Sustainable Development Goals, or EU for SDG, and a growing number of contributors from the GEO community. Over 30 organizations from around the world have participated in the development of the toolkit, including representatives from national statistical offices, national mapping agencies, national and city authorities, academia, research institutions, non-governmental organizations, space agencies, and the private sector. The web portal hosts use cases, data, and tools for SDG 11, applications on housing, open spaces, urbanization, and public transport. Each dataset and tool is openly and freely available, has been peer-reviewed, and comes from science agencies or funded partners. There are also a number of use cases and resources for continuous learning in these areas. Data and tools can be filtered by different parameters, such as data characteristics, coding environment, and SDG indicator to help users discern application areas and distinct attributes. Among the free and open datasets available in the toolkit, you can find the European Commission's Joint Research Center's Global Human Settlement Build-Up Presence, or GHS built, derived from Landsat's image collection that can be used to analyze urbanization, map population, and assess exposure to natural hazards. The toolkit also includes a number of tools that facilitate the production of SDG 11 indicators and enable users to visualize and evaluate available data and more quickly access data of interest. For example, one of the tools you can find is the NASA SEDAT PopGrid Viewer, which is a mapping tool that provides side-by-side comparison of population estimates leveraging global gridded population datasets. Another important source of information available at the toolkit are the use cases. Here you can find documented real-life successes and challenges of cities and countries in using Earth observation and geospatial technologies to fill urban monitoring gaps and address reporting needs or guide policy actions. One very interesting example is the use case about the city of Thessaloniki in Greece, where their municipality established the Urban Resilience Observatory to collect data, measure, and evaluate urban indicators on three main pillars: environment, economy, and social cohesion, to evaluate the city's progress on SDGs. They are offering the possibility of searching, viewing, and downloading satellite data across the Central Macedonia region through user-friendly applications, standards-based services, and APIs. In the Learn section, you can find supplemental resources, including outreach and capacity development material, such as videos, user guides, and recordings of webinars. The toolkit is continuously updated with new data, tools, learning materials, case studies, and other relevant contributions. We invite you to get involved and contact us using the form available in our toolkit portal and share your feedback or submit a case study, data, tool, or other relevant information. We would love to have more experts, policymakers, and enthusiasts from around the world joining us and working together in this global initiative, leaving no one behind in the use of Earth observations to advance Sustainable Development Goal 11 and the new urban agenda. Please don't forget to visit the Toolkit's website and feel free to join the conversation on social networks using the hashtag EOToolkit.
Wonderful. So hopefully this gave you a good overview and tour of what the EO Toolkit includes, and also ways that you can contribute and get involved in this very active and diverse community. So next, we will move with the next part in our session. And so if we can stop us sharing the screen, Donovan, and we will go over to Orestes Spire, a research fellow at the National Observatory of Athens and the SDG contact person of the Greek Geo Office, that is hosted by the National Observatory of Athens. who will moderate our first panel. So Oresti, if I can invite you to the screen and the rest of the panelists and turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Arji. Very nice to be here, and thanks, Rafael. It's unfortunate that you could not be with us live, but I suppose as Geo is expanding, parallel sessions will keep growing. So we had a quick overview on what's the EO Toolkit all about. In this panel discussion, we would like to hear from the people that actually are utilizing, supporting, identifying opportunities, and advocating for the use of this toolkit. So I would ask the panelists to please open the cameras. The discussion will follow, we have two major themes. What is the progress to date and the future opportunities to further develop the long-term capacity of municipalities, local governments to actually apply the toolkit and the toolkit's resources. And secondly, how we can increase collaboration between the public institutions and the SMEs and the private sector in general, and of course academia, across the space value chain in order to leverage these beautiful resources that come from us from the Earth observation domain. I believe we have a very competent and encompassing panel to address these themes. We have a very good and wide range of stakeholders. So we have a city representative, a direct city representative, who is Stella Psaropoulou, who is working in the municipality of Thessaloniki, which is the second largest municipality in Greece. And of course, she is working in the Resilient Thessaloniki office in particular. And only recently, she became the project manager of the city's Urban Resilience Observatory that Rafael mentioned earlier. We have academia with strong societal and policy links coming from Dr. Peter Elias, a senior lecturer in the Department of Geography and team lead of the Lagos Urban Studies Group in Lagos in Nigeria. He's also co-chair of the CoData World Data System on Citizen Science Task Group and a core member of the Idea Maps network. Peter brings his experience in working closely with local and national governments and producing citizen-generated data, and in general building capacity of community mappers regarding geospatial open data. We have a very strong NGO which bridges public institutions with the space sector as a whole. So we have with us today Grazia Fiore, the head of programs at Eurisi, a Paris NGO that gathers space agencies, international organizations, research institutions, and private business involved in space-related activities and tries to stimulate dialogue between the aforementioned public institutions to facilitate bridging space and society. We have, of course, Denis Mouaniki from UN Habitat. Denis is a spatial data expert at UN Habitat. He coordinates daily activities regarding geospatial data production and supports countries and cities in integrating Earth observation into urban monitoring processes. And he currently leads UN Habitat's global activities on producing 3 SDG indicators, 11.2.1, 11.3.1, and 11.7.1. And last but not least, we have a representative from the private sector. So Mr. Kurt Hamel is a senior account manager at Esri, a world leader in geographic information systems that is providing services to NASA, people and programs. So we have several questions to ask our panelists. I will be asking the panelists for 1 to 2 minute responses, but if someone wants to jump in, of course, he may or she may do this. The same applies for panel-wide questions, and we will also be following the Q&A and chat feed for questions from the audience. The panelists may answer directly there, or we can even take some of these questions and discuss them live. So, to kick things off, how is actually the EO Toolkit resources used by city and country leaders to report on several international agreements such as the SDG framework and the New Urban Agenda? So, Stella, would you like to open this panel discussion?
Yes, and thank you for the invitation. It's a great opportunity to be here, talk about the work that we have been doing in the municipality of Thessaloniki. To be honest, we are in our initial steps. What we can actually, what I can say that we are all talking about, we are in an era of digital transformation, and we're all talking about smart cities. But what is all about smart cities? It's how you provide smart solutions that could improve citizens' life. It's not just smart applications. So data play a vital role into our daily operation in the municipality, and they are an important element, and we used to change our decision-making to data-driven decision-making. So Earth Observation Toolkit was for us a pilot case, and it was more like how to learn how to use, upskill our capacity, upgrade our systems, our IT systems, and how to disseminate the effectiveness of such a toolkit to the city's operation, especially within other departments, and to learn how to collaborate. It was about learn how to design, plan, and work differently, and having a holistic perspective. In the meantime, it was an opportunity to open the discourse for the SDGs, and because we are quite behind in Greece in general, not just us, and interrelate them with resilience and our strategic planning, monitoring, and using indicators can show us what are we doing, what's the impact, how we reflect, and how we can learn and interoperate with all the systems that we have. So it's more about integrating the concept within the urban policies and governance, and start working and having this as a model. So the toolkit is an opportunity for us, for sure.
Thanks for this. Dennis, would you like to follow up on this regarding country at least implementations?
Yes, sure, Ristis, and thanks a lot. It's great to be part of this great panel and to also share our own experiences at UN Habitat. The first thing perhaps I say is that the toolkit itself was actually designed from the word go with the intention of supporting the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda work in terms of encouraging more use of Earth observation and geospatial information for monitoring needs of these frameworks. So this alone, it's like the baseline into which all the things that we're doing at the toolkit are actually aligned fully to the monitoring needs and requirements of these global frameworks. But in terms of the use, specific use from cities and countries, I can point maybe 3 or 4 areas where I've seen a lot of activity and engagement at the local level. And this also relates to the capacity and ability of different countries and cities to be able to do their own Earth observation, geospatial information activities. The first area where I've seen a lot of use is to get an overall understanding as to how Earth observation, geospatial information aspects, spatial data can actually be applied to monitor and track the progress towards this global agenda. And within the SDG framework, for example, we have 3 very key indicators which cannot be computed without using Earth observation and geospatial information analysis technologies. We have an indicator on land consumption, or how cities grow spatially. We have an indicator on provision and access to public transport, access and provision of open public spaces. So for these indicators, I've seen countries which are just interested to see how they can actually monitor these indicators and learn from the experiences of others. And here is where the use cases really comes in handy, seeing what has happened in Greece, what has happened in Colombia, Mexico, and so on and so forth. One very important use. The second important use I've seen other countries using this is there are those countries who do not have baseline data for specific computation of these indicators. So we have countries who don't have, say, built up layers for their cities or their urban areas or their urban structure, or even the communities at large. So for these ones, what they are doing is really going to the toolkit and assessing the different data sets that are available there. And the options are many. I think as the video from the earlier presentation was showing, there's a lot of diversity of information and resources there that they are available to countries and cities to explore and use. So very important, getting the baseline data and information for using the computation of this indicator. Then the third thing that I've seen also is there are those countries who are already advanced in their data structures, they already have their layers, but they are going also to the toolkit to see what kind of data is available at the global level and comparing this to what really they have and seeing whether this very varied or is similar to what they have. And this, of course, have different implications in terms of how they monitor whether to improve their data sets or to just not do anything much related to that. Then finally, I've also seen in some quarters where people are just interested, they don't have much, they're just interested to go there and download data and visualize it maybe into maps for their policy making processes or to talk to their policy makers and decision makers. So for me, these four main areas are really critical. They are really supporting the monitoring of the SDGs and urban agenda activities, but they're also helping much improved understanding of how these technologies are useful for the monitoring of this global agenda. Thanks, and back to you.
Thanks, Dennis. I come from the toolkit, but I am constantly surprised on the new data that comes in and the quality of this data and the global aspect of this data. Still, it's a wide world of Earth observation is a very wide word and space observation in general. So, Grazia, could you offer some other examples of data provided by space agencies that are useful for the SDGs and in the general planning of cities and local communities?
Well, in our work with local and regional authorities, the applications that keep presenting themselves are those related to the monitoring of soil movements, which are vital to both monitor infrastructure, critical infrastructure, operationally, and to monitor cultural heritage, this within the framework of research projects, but not only. In particular, for soil monitoring, I crossed several cities that procured services based on Earth observation, also on their own, not only using data that are freely available, and I'm particularly thinking about Copernicus, obviously, but also by inquiring private actors, private service providers. Air quality monitoring is also an application that has proved to be, very successful. Cities are using a layer of satellite imagery coupled with sensors, obviously, on the streets, to understand where urban islands are, and then to better plan their urban development. I came across lately an example from the city of Prague in Czech Republic, where you wouldn't think about that when thinking about heat increase and climate change. But they've noticed indeed a great increase in their normal temperatures, and they've been relying on Earth observation lately to implement policies around their transport stops, so planting trees or placing fountains, for example. So I would say that for urban planning, there is today quite a range of data that are used. From my perspective, soil subsidence and air quality monitoring are the ones that are most used. But there are also many examples in which cities rely on Earth observation to check on the balance between green areas and built areas within their cities. And then there are a range of observations around cities, but that are necessary for the cities themselves, about water quality, for example, and especially the regions, not that much the cities, but it's probably a matter of responsibilities especially regions are relying on Earth observation data for monitoring disasters and risks related to floods. Let's just think about what happened in Central Europe last summer. And I mean, Earth observation data, and in particular Copernicus data, are being widely used to predict and then monitor the effects of floods on cities.
Thank you.
I could go on, but I mean...
Yeah, the list is long, I know. Stella, would you like to add on this operational aspect, everyday operation, city needs that Grazia hinted at?
No, I think that was pointed out quite well. I would like also to mention heat waves and urban heat island. That is an example that we use from a program now that we have recently launched a platform. And during the summer, we need it actually because we had 3 heat waves. And I can also mention wildfires. Another example that we faced during the summer, because we have a peri-urban forest, and we had it was burnt. Likely that was for a few just hours, and but within a day we can actually see the whole amount of damage and the whole area. What happened, and it was preferable for us to be well prepared. Urban planning is just floodings, trees, green spaces. I would agree more. I think it's something that we can focus and use for prevention, preparedness, and resilience. So it's something that we need to disseminate to our planning situation.
Thanks. I know that Toolkit has many wide and varied products and data, but I'm sure that some particular needs or aspects of your daily works are not covered. So, Peter, would you like to comment on this? What is missing from the Toolkit?
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity and for having me here. I need to say that for us in this part of the world where Earth observation data are very scarce, we have the challenge of budget scarcity, where government is not able to develop their own tools to be able to carry on some of the urban planning or disaster management operations. So in this regard, there is need for location-based maps, which will specify areas that are of risk zones, or to be able to trace and delineate trash piles and see how to what kind of decision to be taken in terms of the management of trash piles or flood risk zone, as is a common challenge in our context. So that is one important area that I will expect to see more on the toolkit, location-based maps. Another category is maps on demand, which I think will be very helpful to state governments and agencies to be able to have access to real-time geospatial information. For example, here in my city, Lagos, the state government want to, because land transaction is one major component of their activity and one major source of revenue. So getting map on demand will be very, very helpful in being able to compute land use charge for house owners. The same thing for addressing specific urban issues. For example, issues around managing utilities is also important. It will also be helpful for them to have such maps on demand, which are going to be on real time. It's also good for, it also will be helpful for them to be able to respond to disasters real time. Sometimes we have areas that maybe there's a building collapse, or there is an area that is affected by flood, or maybe there's a particular outbreak, maybe health or disease outbreak or something. So they can easily access such a spatial data and be able to use that to make decisions to address such challenges. So I think these two areas, among others, are areas that I think for data scarce cities, it will be helpful to have such on the toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Regarding especially disasters, perhaps the toolkit could focus more on the disaster preparedness phase. But we heard 3 hours ago that the DRR toolkit is on the work. So perhaps these two toolkits together would actually help in this direction. So, if does anyone want to comment what the toolkit has yet to address? If not, we could pursue our next question. So, we heard at the anchor session 1 hour ago from Ickley that geo products and information, including the toolkit, are all very well and good. However, the Ickley highlighted the need for infrastructural investment in order to be able to use the toolkit, the capacity to use the toolkit. So I would begin this question from Dennis, and please jump in, anyone else who thinks he or she should respond.
Sure, Restis. The issue of capacity, I like to usually consider it as multi-level, because within the toolkit, for example, we are providing options for capacity development in terms of really learning how to do things, how to use the resources, how to apply them for, particularly in this context, for urban-related work. So for me, I look at capacity, I think, from a perception of beyond making these resources and tools available, how would then us as even the toolkit community go a step further to support maybe the cities, the countries to actually apply this within their own infrastructural setups. And I know for sure that this is something that is a discussion that is very much ongoing within the toolkit steering committee. Is something that we just discussed, I think, the last week or the week before. How do we bring all these resources in terms of knowledge that we have as a toolkit community to really start pushing this to more directing our efforts towards really supporting the people who need it, and the people who need listening to the clear message. I think the people who need resources, the cities, the countries who actually are the ones who need to apply all these resources that we're providing for them. How we move to that stage is still a bit of a challenge, because of course there are a lot of implications in terms of resource availability. But I really am very confident that we have goodwill across a lot of us and a lot of people in the community, and all these people sharing knowledge, sharing tools openly, making them accessible. We have a lot of technology now that you can process a lot of things on the fly using free application. So this, for me, I see is an opportunity. There's a bit of challenge there in terms of how do we transfer all this knowledge to the local systems, but is really something that is really possible. And in conclusion, I think I say usually starting small always usually has a lot of multiply effect and showing what can be done there and how, and that is what we are discussing consistently within the toolkit steering committee, how to push this and to make sure that we provide this kind of capacity and knowledge to the people who are using it.
Can I jump in?
Yes, of course, Peter, yes.
Okay, thank you. Being in the academics and working very closely with the community groups, I think we have to think about how to build local capacity. Just to follow up on what Dennis said, among the community mappers. A number of them are working in the slum communities using modern tools and techniques to collect data about their situation, about their environment, about their communities. So there's need for us to create more learning opportunities to be able to bring on board the local community groups to make use, to understand this toolkit and make use of it. Another group I want to talk about are our own university students who are being exposed to many open source tools. We know of OpenStreetMap, for example, and those who are driving it are majorly university students. I coordinate the UMappers group here in my university, and I think if we can leverage on the army of youths in our various university or tertiary institutions, we'll be able to expose them to the toolkit. Apart from transferring knowledge, we also create a lot of visibility, because by the time these people graduate and they get into work or offices and organizations, they'll be able to promote the use of this toolkit beyond what we are doing currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Kurt, I know that many of the products and tools actually have guidelines in the toolkit, but I know you have been preparing something called LearnPath, which is, I would just call it a better, more visual, more practical way of getting into the toolkit. Would you like to comment on this?
No, thank you, Orestes. First of all, though, I would like to thank RG and Laurent for all the effort they put into making this session work, and to you, Orestes, for being our panel moderator today. So with that, let me address the question directly, because it is about capacity building. There are many people who are unfamiliar with any of these tools that are available in the EO Toolkit, and so some of them need to have a significant, useful path to be able to put this tool, a specific tool, to work in their own use case and their own geography. And so sometimes a formal lesson that's available online is needed, and that's what we would call a learn path. And a learn path is something that Esri was contributing to our part of the EO Toolkit, is to building this learn path to allow anyone to organize their thoughts, organize their data, organize their methodologies into something that fits into one of the tools in the model. And Dennis, I wanted to thank Dennis for his leadership in this as well. And let me just turn this question over to him, and for him to talk about those aspects from the contextual standpoint.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Kat. Perhaps to give the context of why this is important is what we've learned in many contexts, and I think this goes back to your question, Orestes, earlier. Earlier I had a call with one of the countries, and like in many other contexts, what they were telling me is, we know there's a lot of resources available, we know, but we at the local level, we don't have data. We don't even know how we can actually utilize our local knowledge here to produce some of this data or to understand this data. And in this process, us supporting a lot of countries and cities over the years, is what we've learned is sometimes what we want to do is create a sort of easy to follow learning process that is audiovisual in manner. Usually most of this works pretty well in many contexts, but the way the knowledge is disseminated needs to be like incremental, so that we have different entry levels for different people. You need, at least for the, I know for the planner, for example, wants to explain to the policymaker why it's important to use or to look at things from a mapping perspective. So here the entry level is you need to be able to explain the importance of something, then go into the details of how to implement it. And this is the approach that in what you're doing with the toolkit, and with the very good coordination of Kat and the Esri team, building the learn path is really this incremental way of building capacities, particularly on the use of Earth observation and geospatial information to monitor progress in terms of the SDGs, the new urban agenda aspects, but also to say how do we translate also this a lot of knowledge you are generating into something that is also policy oriented, that can really help them to pass the message that is needed. So this intersection in terms of simplicity, in terms of how we enable the users to understand the processes, but also to be able to replicate some of the processes that we're doing or are being done at the global level to produce some of this information is really a major driver for these land parts, and these are being produced for all the indicators, particularly these ones we are focusing on within the SDG 11 Earth observation oriented indicators. And again, thanks, Kat, for all the great work you and team are doing to support this.
Thanks for this elaborate answer, but I would still, since Evangelos Gerasopoulos in the chat asks, tomorrow, how do we approach city authority to start implementing the toolkit tomorrow? And I know that Grazia is used to approaching cities and explaining very technical and fantastic space stuff to cities. Grazia, would you like to finish off this question?
Yes. Well, what we do at Eurisi, our business, let's say, even though we are non-for-profit, is to produce use cases that are easy to understand. So we do not focus on the technology used, but on the benefits. From my point of view, the next step for the EO toolkit is to be translated into as many languages as possible, because we can't expect everybody to speak English. And if we really want to arrive to the local level, we have to do it in their language. Then, from my point of view, there is the need for a holistic approach, meaning that the research must work hand in hand with the politicians in order to make sure that A, there is the digital infrastructure to receive this information, and B, to make sure that this information is used to act, hence that there is enough budget once you know that you have an environmental problem to intervene, for example. I speak very often with research centers and universities who tell me we transfer so much information to this and this department, to this and this ministry, but then, I mean, we don't know what they do with the information. And I think this is very frustrating to know that, I mean, you could have prevented damages from floods, for example, and that you didn't do it. And this happens in Europe as well. So, I mean, there is need for holistic approaches. And if we want to go to the local level, we have to stop talking only among ourselves, but we really need to go to the local places and speak in their own languages and make sure that the trainings are appropriate to the people we are trying to address. So I think the EO toolkit is a wonderful first step, but it opens the way to a number of further steps to arrive to the local level.
Okay, so it seems we need both technical guidance and terminology and discussion level, approach. So thank you for this. Now it's the next question is for all panelists. As Raphael mentioned, we have tens of organizations contributing to the toolkit, which is a truly collaborative partnership. I would ask the panelists to give one or two bullets. What are the good, how this came to be? I mean, what is the good practices in such a collaborative partnership, and what should be avoided or is more difficult to handle? This is for all, especially Kurt. What gives? Why would a commercial company contribute resources to such a collaborative partnership? This is special for Kurt. Thank you. Please just speak. You're muted, Kurt.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was having a button issue. Thank you, Orestes. When we're thinking about the whole climate issue, I would think a company would be motivated by one word: grandchildren. At COP26, one of the scientists was quoted about talking about the Earth. He said, the Earth is like a burning building and our grandchildren are in it. And so we're Esri is a privately held company, and so we can focus in on the things that matter to the owners of the company. And certainly, building a sustainable future is central into the mission of our company. And we use technology, people, our community, and frankly, our influence to that end, because we want to be contributing to this global effort that you all are part of. And we gladly share our resources with organizations like GEO, who are trying to build a sustainable future alongside our efforts. So I think it's a common vision, and grandchildren.
Can I say something to a good practice? I think that for all the speakers that said good sharing and good exchange of good practices is something that we can now see in networks, and networking is one step for disseminate and learn, and for capacity building as well, because if I wanted to answer to the question, the previous question, capacity building is quite important, and training and mentoring and coaching, and in order to bring the civil society with the officers of a municipality. And I would give a good practice that Thessaloniki actually did, and that was the Thessaloniki Risk Data Portal. And that was in collaboration support pioneered by the World Bank. And that was a collaboration with local stakeholders that are responsible competing for risk reduction or natural or man-made disasters, like the fire department, police department. And we launched a platform where we can all put our data and knowledge on a GIS platform in order to well be informed in case of an emergency. And that was in a pilot situation. So I think that when we talk about collaboration, we need to keep pushing, and we need to keep working all together, because if you forget, they actually forget any pilot that you create. So I think that collaboration is number one for what we want to do as city, because municipality is just a governmental level, but it needs to collaborate with the whole fabric if we need to do something for the city.
Okay, thanks for this. We have a question in the Q&A from Lawrence Friedl from NASA. There's a lot of talk about capacity building, but the question is, when do we stop? When do we say that now we have enough capacity to address this particular issue and move on to the next? I don't know if Dennis or Peter would care to comment.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I can go first, Peter, if you don't mind. So for me, the answer for this one is pretty straightforward. The capacity, in my view, really depends on the need. So if you're talking about capacity, say, to monitor, or what Gracie, I think, was talking about, from monitoring all the way to the action, then that is a benchmark with which we measure the capacity. So, and I can give you many examples and many like practical things that I've also seen working with countries and cities. Usually, one of the things, like when we go to a country or to a city to support them for monitoring, this particular example, is really to assess what kind of capacity, or at least what ability they have at the local level. Then we set targets, exactly what we want to achieve within the period of time that we are working with them. And our measurement for the capacity that we built would be based on when have they achieved the goal of, say, measuring a given SDG indicator for the particular case of this explaining? So then that is what we measure. Are they able then, once we learn with them through the process by doing the work, are they then able to continue to do that without our support or with very minimal support? So the measurement for our success and also their success in this context for the capacity is, are they able to achieve what they want to achieve for a given task? Of course, it varies a lot. Like if, for example, you want to measure or build capacity to translate something from data to policy or to encourage more use of data for decision making, then the benchmarks would be are always different, and having always that target, what exactly you want to achieve is the only thing that you can actually use to measure what capacity. And capacity is never enough, because like particularly in the other observation, your community, by the time you are learning one thing, something new is come up. If you want, so it's always a continuous learning process but at least you always have a way to benchmark and see like whether you're progressing in terms of understanding and also measuring your growth.
Yes, thank you, Dennis. I will add here that to measure progress in terms of capacity building, we can talk about, for example, number of organizations who are making use of Earth Observation Toolkit, whether within a city or within a region and all that. And that will help us to see the gap in terms of those who are not using the toolkit. Or even within a given agency or organization, we may find out how many technical staff are exposed to the Earth Observation Toolkit. We did a similar survey here in Lagos, and we're surprised that there are many agencies that whose work require geospatial data, but do not have department, do not have even trained staff, in the use of these modern tools. In some cases, they even have a unit that is already equipped with equipment, but nobody to operate the equipment and all that. So I think we can approach this solving different approaches, either by finding out how many organizations make use of this toolkit, or how many technical staff or such organization have skills in this area. And because I'm in the university and I then also talk about university, we can also look at our curriculum. What are we having in the curriculum that can build capacity of future experts or even technicians in these areas? So that can also give us an idea of the gap, because it is what we're able to, the training we're able to give the students that will translate into producing necessary experts to be able to make use of these tools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. And as we have run out of time, I would like to ask you with a parting phrase, one phrase only, please. Your advice for the DRL toolkits, the biodiversity toolkits, the ocean toolkits that are around the corner. So it's an appropriate way to end this discussion. What is your one phrase advice to them? Thank you. For all panelists, please.
Well, to involve the administrations and stakeholders who are supposed to use it.
For me too, it's political engagement and commitment for that too.
Mine is, at least what I've learned is, in these engagements where you have a lot of partners, be prepared for a lot of pulling and tagging, because everyone has different interests. So what you really need to have is a very clear picture of what you really want to achieve. And with this, then you need to really bring everyone in the same page. Otherwise, the success is going to be a challenge.
I will also add that the need for strong political will. If you are not able to get the policy makers to buy into this initiative, of course, it will not fly. So political will is very key. Thank you.
This was I really enjoyed this discussion. Thanks all panelists. I'm sure we will again speak in the future for, regarding the toolkit and more. With this, I would like to pass the floor to Laurent Durier, sorry for butchering your name, our SDG man in the Geo Secretariat, for summing up this panel discussion. And thank you all.
Thank you, Orestes. Thank you, everyone. This was really an amazing panel of discussion. I think we went to very broad issues because actually this toolkit is much more than just a toolkit for urban issues. We have seen that it was co-designed with users, with space agencies, with private sector, and that's why I think it's so successful and so inspiring for the entire geo community. We are addressing here SDG 11, but also disaster risk reduction, water, climate issues. In a sector urban that is so important because we as we see it's just become the fourth engagement priority for geo, and this is because urban is so dynamic. As we know, half of the cities that we will have in 2070 are not built yet. We have example here from Angola that are showing how they need new maps. They are asking, maps on demand. We have cities like very ancient cities in Greece that are fighting against fire and that need updated maps. So we see it's a very dynamic and broad application. And so for the geo community, we were asked how we can help on capacity development. And I think one thing we come to this question of capacity development, and we have to co-design it with the rest. I mean, it's much easier for the geo community to organize itself to answer the needs once we saw who are the people that are using it, which data, which methodology are more useful, so that we can adapt our capacity development proposals and build it together. So I'm sure this all these efforts will be successful. And as people said, it's just the beginning. We are still to answer to other issues such as language issues and then address more users. And it's a global project that will address local needs. So that's all the tricky issue about this toolkit development. So I think we are late. RG, it would be great if you could come back. I would, for the Geo Secretary and Geo community, I want to thank all speakers, all the toolkit community, and I'm sure it's just the beginning of this long journey until 2030. We are not there yet, but for sure this toolkit will help a lot. Thanks. Back to you, RG.
Thank you very much, Laurent. And I will now introduce the next part of our side event, and perhaps if our colleagues at the Geo Secretariat can help work out some technical details with our next speaker. So in the next part of our agenda, we have a number of short presentations by contributors to the EU Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. And so we'll hear about and see some demonstrations of global data sets and tools that are part of this online knowledge resource, the EU Toolkit, with some examples of where these tools and data sets have been applied at the national context or even at the more localized city or local community level. And so with that, I will just very briefly mention that our first speaker is Dr. Yifan Ban, Professor and Director of Geoinformatics at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. And Yifan has been involved with the EU Toolkit from the beginning, and she's also a co-lead of the Geo Initiative Global Urban Observation and Informations. Yifan, can you hear us? And
yes, I could hear you, but unfortunately, I can't turn on my camera, so I'll be a picture instead. Thank you.
Please let's share the screen and go ahead and get started. Donovan,
Okay.
please share the screen, and Yifan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aji, for organizing the session and for the opportunity for me to present how EO big data can be used to monitor urbanization and its environmental impact in order to support sustainable and climate resilient cities. Next, please. Skip over. As you all have heard from the recent climate conference, COP 26, and also the IPCC report, we have now a climate crisis. It's code red for humanity. We are facing great challenges from melting sea ice to retreat of glacier, from drought to wildfire to urban flooding. Next, please. And urbanization is another great challenge. Today, we have 56% of population living in cities. It is expected by 2050, another 2.5 billion people will be moving to urban areas. So urbanization have a significant effect, especially rapid urbanization on plant, from pollution to urban heat island, you have heard, to urban flooding, of course, the impact to the urban biodiversity as well as biodiversity around urban areas. Next, please. So since the launch of Landsat in 1972, now we have almost 50 years of Earth observation, especially with the recent launch of Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, we have global coverage of EO data at 10, 20 meter resolution every 5 and 6 days. So they provide a great opportunity to support sustainable and resilient urban planning. Next, please. And the big data, of course, also provides some challenges because we have a huge amount of data, dense time series data. How do we deal with it? Here is an example of our recent research using SAR and optical data from Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 to produce urban extent maps automatically based on machine learning and also AI or deep learning method. So anywhere on the globe, you select your study area, then we can search for data and then extract build up areas automatically. Next, please. So so here is the example to show urban extraction in Dar es Salaam, and I think this method is tool especially useful for cities in the global south, where there's a lack of data or information to support planning activities. Next, please. Another one the city planners are interested in are change detection. The planners in Stockholm told us that we would like to have a digital twin, not only a static digital twin, also a dynamic digital twin. As soon as anything changed in the city, we would like to know. So therefore, we want to have continuous urban change detection. Can you do it with satellite data? Because right now we're using surveying in the field and it's very difficult. So another example is how to use EO-based data to analyze urbanization and impact on urban green infrastructure as well as ecosystem services. Next, please. So urban heat island, you have heard a lot about it, and EO data can be used to support improved urban thermal environment and also using nature-based solutions. Next, please. So this is an example about urban flooding. You have heard about many different urban flooding events. This is Beira in Mozambique from the tropical cyclone Idai. So rapid mapping in this kind of event is very important, and EO data can support that. Next exam. You have got a tour from earlier about the EO Toolkit. Here are just examples of different data sets produced by EO that can be used for SDG indicator 11.3.1 land use efficiency production. Next, please. And we also used EO, this kind of data and developed the app on Google's engine. Using this app, you can define cities, and then you can compare different products, data products, then generate indicators directly, and you can see the result in figures and numbers. Next, please. Yes, so of course, using geodata is not without challenges. City definition is still, can you click, Donovan? It's so without challenges. So first is city definition. It's not, often people still use local admin boundaries, and but with the people-centered definition, we need to define the cities and build up data sets. There are a number of them available in different time period, and they have different reliability. How to best using them, we still need some work. And also the data set, if you use time 1, time 2, the change between them, and the accuracy would decrease. So it's better maybe to go directly to use change detection tools. We still need to develop those tools in order for efficient SDG monitoring. And also different data set produce different indicator result. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yifan. We appreciate this presentation. I had a quick question for you on the need for local level validation of some of these global data sets. Can you speak a bit to that, especially given some of the efforts that you've been leading at your institution?
Yeah, thank you, Aji. That's an excellent question. I think it's definitely important to get, some validation of different data set across compare. Maybe they, even the data set, some are for build-up area, some are impervious surface. They're not exactly the same. Build-up doesn't include road network, for example. The other data set include road network and paved surfaces. So therefore, we have to verify different purposes using this data set, and also collecting validation samples to be able to validate. Recently, I've contacted IIASA. They have done a volunteer-based campaign for build-up data set collections. So we try to get access to that based on crowdsourced data to see if we can use that, to support the toolkit. So it's ongoing.
Thank you very much, Yifan. Thank you. If you have additional questions for Yifan, please add questions to the chat or use the Q&A to share your questions. And I see one question by Orestes, and we'll take it very briefly, Yifan, if you'd like to offer maybe 1 or 2 quick thoughts on that. He states, even though 11.3.1 calculation, the land consumption indicator accepted by the UN that leverages Earth observations, the sensitivity of the indicator to the city definition is quite large. What is delivered at the end?
Yeah, I think that is also, I talk about challenges. City definition is one big challenge. People define city differently, then you have complete different outcomes. So therefore, I strongly recommend everyone to follow the UN Habitat's guideline regarding city definition.
Thank you very much, Yifan, and perhaps other speakers can also comment on that in writing. So next, we will move over to our next presenter. And so some of you may have also heard him present at an earlier session. I'm pleased to welcome Cascade Tucholsky, who is an Earth Institute postdoctoral research scientist working with the Center for International Earth Science Information Network at the Columbia Climate School at Columbia University. Welcome, Cascade. Let's share the screen and go over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, RG. I'm so happy to be here to present. Unfortunately, my camera is not working at the moment, but hopefully I can get it going after my presentation. Do I need to share the slide deck? Or
no, we should. So Donovan, can you please share your screen and the slide deck for Cascade's presentation? We can't see it yet. Fantastic, thank you.
All right, so today I'm going to give a brief presentation that my colleague Bob Chen helped contribute to, and we've presented various versions of this, different forms with the launch of the toolkit. And so broadly, I'll be speaking about gridded population data sets and how they can be used to support SDG indicator needs. But this is really something I hope is a conversation so that we can get feedback on how we can improve these tools and these data sets so they're as accessible to end users from across levels of governance and data science expertise. So next slide, please. So yeah, very briefly, yeah, I'm a human environmental geographer. I work at Season at the Columbia Climate School. I presented earlier on urban extreme heat exposure, which that data set is also in the toolkit, but a core part of my research is using gridded population data sets to explore a range of human environmental dynamics or problems, if you will. I received my PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2020. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, tracking the SDG indicators requires accurate, consistent, fine-grained population data. I think there are 72 or 71 SDG indicators that require population in their either the denominator, it's like a rate, or within the calculation of the specific SDG indicator. As many of you probably know, there are a lot of countries on the planet that have not released or do not have extremely high resolution population data, making it difficult to quantify SDG indicators. And so gridded population data sets can be used in lieu of fine-grained census data to start working towards estimating progress towards achieving SDG indicators. Next slide, please. So there are several different gridded population data sets, and they are built with different modeling frameworks. So for those of you who are not aware of gridded population data, essentially it is a gridded lattice at different spatial resolutions, and then each pixel in that lattice has a population assigned to it. How those populations get assigned differ between the 5 or 7 different gridded population data sets that are produced. Next slide, please. So I published a paper with the team last year exploring how the different 5 of the different gridded population data sets can be used to explore populations exposed to 3 different hazard contexts. The one here is the 2015 earthquake that struck Nepal. And this is not just important for tracking SDG indicators, including reducing populations exposed to hazards, but also for disaster risk reduction and disaster response scenarios. And this both has a real world implications for bringing services to people in disaster scenarios, but also for estimating the cost, financial needs in hazards or during hazard events or in anticipatory actions. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the various gridded population data sets have different modeling approaches, from the gridded population of the world that Season produces, which equally allocates people to grid cells based on the finest census data. So that data product doesn't have any Earth observations to help model where populations to be, to more complex data sets that first use, say, a land cover map that identifies impervious surface and then allocates populations to areas where we think humans actually are living. Next slide, please. But as I've kind of hinted at and said, each gridded population data set can show very different estimates for population counts in each grid cell. So right here we have a map of Nepal, Each pixel is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, and the colors represent the area of agreement of whether a pixel is even inhabited. So this isn't even the range of population values, it's just whether people are in a grid cell. And across 5 different data sets, we see a lot of disagreement in some areas as to whether people even live in a given geography or not. This is not to say that these data sets are not useful. They're immensely useful, but I think end users, my hope with this is to create greater awareness so that end users are aware of the differences between the different gridded population data sets. Next slide, please. So when we sum up the number of people impacted by the 2015 earthquake, and then we split those into urban and rural areas, we see that, especially because the earthquake was very close to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, that those populations impacted by the earthquake, the most extreme part of the earthquake, or an intensity of greater than 7, were predominantly still rural, but each gridded population data set estimates a pretty big difference between the populations impacted. So from a decision-making standpoint, it's possible to present a range of population estimates so that costs and resources can be allocated correctly. Next slide, please. So this was mentioned earlier, but the PopGrid viewer is a online tool where people can upload vector shapefiles and then download different population estimates across gridded population data sets. We, in the EO Toolkit right now, is a preliminary release of the stacked gridded population data sets. So the grids are sometimes not perfectly aligned with each other or in different spatial projections. So we've created a stacked data set. So the gridded population data sets align, and then end users who have experience with GIS or working with Python or R or other scripting languages can do more complex analysis to understand the range of populations in a given geography, specifically across SDG indicators. Next slide, please. So this is just an example that was shown earlier of the PopGrid viewer, and you can click around and draw polygons directly on there and get different population estimates. But you can also upload shapefiles. Now, the PopGrid compare data set are just stacked raster data, stacked rasters that can be downloaded, and they're global, and then end users can implement them for different use cases. Next slide, please. So most of what I talked about today is available at popgrid.org, which is a consortium of creators and end users of the gridded population data sets. And it's a great resource to start familiarizing yourself if you are curious to learn more or have questions about which gridded population data set or data sets may be best for your use case. I think that's my final slide. So thank you very much. Please do not hesitate to email me or at any point. Happy to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cascade. If you have questions for Cascade, please include them in the chat or in the Q&A. We will move to our next speaker in the interest of time. So let's go over to Thomas. Thomas Kemper is leading the Global Human Settlement Layer project at the European Commission Joint Research Center. And he's also an active contributor and leader in the Human Planet Initiative, and also has been involved with the SDG and the EO Toolkit effort from the start. Thomas, over to you. And let's share the slides, Donovan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, RG, for introducing. I think we can immediately skip my bio. So next one. And already the next one. I can also be very brief in the very beginning, because already in Cascade's presentation, you heard a lot about the different data sets, etc. The Global Human Settlement Layer that is part of the EO Toolkit basically tries to produce also such population grids. But on top of that, we also produce the underlying data. Cascade mentioned already that sometimes you need a covariate to distribute the people from the census into something else, and we use built-up area derived from satellite imagery to do so. And then our core products include also a third product that is what is called SMOD, so apologies for the acronyms. That's a settlement model that applies the degree of urbanization that allows to classify settlements in a harmonized way. But I can show this on the next slide in more detail with an example from Bogota in Colombia, where in the first place we use free and open Sentinel data in this case, but we work also a lot with Landsat data to map built-up areas. Next slide. And we take then the census data collected by CSIN and distribute the people from the census units that are often quite large back into the buildings that we've been mapping. And you see here a population density map derived from actually the open census data produced by Colombia. And then I mentioned the degree of urbanization. If you go to the next slide, we are then classifying this population density and the built-up area into settlement classes. So you see here in red the city areas, in yellow the suburban areas, and smaller villages and cities and towns in different colors surrounding. This is very important because a lot of the SDGs are asking for information about the amount of rural population, the amount of urban dwellers, and with this definition, you can report back to the UN in a harmonized way, so that the data for Colombia, as is shown here, is comparable to data from other countries. Next slide, please. All these data sets that we are producing are in the toolkit. I mentioned here in larger figures the ones I was talking about, so the built-up area, the population, and the settlement model. But there's also some other derived data sets. We have a higher resolution version for Europe. Then the urban center database that takes this degree of urbanization and maps out all the cities in the world and tries to describe them. And finally, there's also the function urban areas. But in view of time, I think I cannot go into details. What is important, I think, for us is also shown on the next slide then, that we do not want to deliver only data. We also want to deliver tools that allow users to produce the same information that we are generating. So we are using open satellite information, and we put out the tools that allow you to exactly follow this process from A to Z. So you can take the Masada tool from the toolkit to derive the built-up area. You can then combine it with maybe your own census data that is much better than what we are providing at a global scale to produce your own population grid. It's a bit what I presented for Colombia, where we had highest resolution census data. And then you do your settlement classification, which then could lead also to application of the land use efficiency calculator. And then you have a full set of tools to process your own data and come up with some SDG reporting. And that can be done at a national level, but it can also go down to the city level. Next slide. I'm going to show next some examples of what can be done. We've been using here the open census of Colombia to illustrate that. So we are able to classify the entire territory of Colombia by the degree of urbanization, so that we have the cities, the towns, villages, and the rural areas. And then we can see what type of information is in the census actually available. And then you can come up with statistics here, the access to water, and you see that 79% of the households in cities have access to safe and affordable drinking water, but only 54.3% of households in rural areas. So this is just one example, and I have two more examples on the next slide. The access to electricity, it's the same story again. This is all open information, readily available, and just by combining different data sets, you are able to generate new information. The last example I have is on access to internet. On the next slide, please. And that really shows the added value that Earth observation in general can contribute to this SDG reporting today. So we really can without a dramatic effort generate new information. So that's really something that I would like to point out. And with the tools that are in the toolkit now, you can experiment with your own data and maybe generate information for your own administrative unit of interest, be it the country or at the local level. On the next slide, I would like to also show a bit of the updates, because that's also important. Our current data are a bit stuck in the year 2015, and we need to update the data. And can you move to the next slide, please? And yeah, so we are now working on updates of our data set. There we also need to go a bit beyond the binary information that we are releasing here. If you go to the next slide, we are now combining different types of information from the satellite. So it's information about the open spaces, about the greenness of the city. And if you are looking here at the example of Johannesburg, you see that the central parts of Johannesburg contain a lot of green information. That's the more upper class residential areas, while the former townships like Soweto in the southwest, or also a bigger one in the northeast of Johannesburg, they are very densely populated with very little open spaces. So this information that really brings an added value to this discussion. And on the next slide, we see also this, if we just look at the built-up fraction that we can generate here. So again, the townships have a much higher built-up fraction than the other residential areas. So this is just to illustrate that there's also a lot of progress, and I'm sure in the follow-up presentation by Mattia, we will see much more of such progress that is needed to keep up and to really be able to generate this information. And now I would like to ask you to go back, please, to the slide, the last slide with text that I had there. Yes, thank you. I mentioned the updates, and there's also a big progress on our side because the Commission has agreed to this importance of having regularly updated global built-up area information. So that's why the production of global built-up areas and population data will move from this more experimental production that we are doing currently in the GHSL team to an operational production under the Copernicus program. That then really assures regular updates of this information at high spatial resolution available for everyone. We are currently working on the contracting and tendering, and we expect this to be starting to be operational during next year. So there's really a regular global update then for everyone to be used. And I think I stop here with my presentation. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you very much. Wonderful to hear about these latest updates and the move into also providing operational products. Thank you. And so with that, we'll please, if you have questions, and let me see, I see there is a question coming in. Do you distinguish between residential and non-residential areas?
Yeah.
Thomas?
Yes, so in the old data we do not, but in the new data that we are generating that will be released also in the Human Planet Initiative group for initial testing. We do differentiate between residential and non-residential, so mostly industrial and commercial buildings at a global level.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move over to our next speaker. And if you have additional questions, please include them in the chat or under the Q&A. So Mattia Marconcini, research scientist and project manager at the Smart Cities and Special Development team of the German Aerospace Center, DLR. Hi, Mattia. Let's share the screen, Donovan, and go over to you.
Thank you, Archie, for the nice introduction. Also, in my case, we can skip the bio slide and jump directly to the point. Yeah, so the goal of my talk here now is to introduce the World Settlement Footprint, WSF for short. Specifically, the WSF is a collection of open and free high-resolution global data sets developed at the German Aerospace Center, DLR, with the support of ESA and the World Bank, which aims at characterizing urbanization at the planetary scale with unprecedented quality. Next, please. So the first product of the suite has been the WSF 2015, a 10-meter resolution binary mask outlining the 2015 global settlement extent that has been derived by jointly exploiting multi-temporal Sentinel-1 radar and optical Landsat 8 satellite imagery. And the layer proved to be the most accurate product of its kind, and we did it based on 900,000 validation samples that have been collected by crowdsourcing photo interpretation of Google Earth imagery. And in particular, it proved really capable of reliably outlining not only major cities, but also suburban and rural areas. Next, please. So as one can see here at the example of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the layer looks already particularly accurate and reliable. However, next, please. Thanks to the availability of Sentinel-2 data and further improvements in the underlying approach, in the past months, we have been able to generate a 10-meter resolution than over WSF 2019, which exhibit even higher quality and detail, as clearly visible in the zoom at the lower left corner. This is also supported as well by an extensive validation based on 1 million crowdsourced labels. Next, please. The examples here for the cities of Lumumbashi, Karachi, and Port-au-Prince showcase the remarkable detail of the layer, along with the further enhancement in outlining smaller settlements and single isolated buildings located in suburban and rural regions, thanks to the employment of Sentinel-2 imagery in place of Landsat 8. Next, please. Anyhow, the aim of the suite is to provide additional information besides outlining the sole settlement extent. So in this regard, we also aim at estimating the percent impervious surface, which describes for each pixel the actual portion on the ground covered by paved surfaces, and is considered a good proxy for the building density. This resulted in the WSF 2019 imperviousness layer, which we expect to become of high support for several applications, as for instance, characterizing the Italian phenomenon or assessing the risk of urban floods. Next, please. So to give you an idea of how relevant the dataset could be for characterizing urban morphology, let's consider the three regions here, whose total settlement extent is quite similar, but show completely different imperviousness patterns. Bangalore shows in general pretty high values everywhere. On the contrary, Dublin, apart from the old city center and industrial site, is associated with rather low values, whereas in Kinshasa and Brazzaville, we can see a gradient from the densely built-up center to the suburban areas. Next, please. Also, as we have seen from previous presentations, to properly quantify the number of people at risk, information on population density is of key importance. So to this purpose, we are about to complete the WSF 2019 population, so another layer for Cascade, where census figures available at the finest administrative level are used to estimate the number of people per pixel by jointly considering the WSF 2019 imperviousness along with the ancillary land use data. Next, please. So needless to say, for understanding urbanization, proper knowledge of the past is mandatory. So in such framework, we have generated the WSF Evolution, a revolutionary data set that outlines on a yearly basis the growth of the settlement extent globally at 30-meter spatial resolution so far from 1985 to 2002. The WSF Evolution has been derived by processing the entire Landsat 5 and Landsat 7 archive, so about 7 million scenes, and based on a validation exercise with more than 1.2 million reference samples, it outperforms any other similar layer presented so far. Next, please. So the animations here show how urbanization took place concurrently in 4 different cities. In Bangkok, in the upper left corner, it resulted in the loss of a number of rice fields, especially in the northern and western side. Indianapolis instead shows a steady growth with a pattern in blocks typical of North America. Cairo experienced a tremendous growth in the desert on both the western and the eastern sides, and New Delhi mostly developed instead, for instance, in the southern part. And next, please. So last but definitely not least, the suite includes the Wsb3d layer, which, unique of its kind, allows to estimate globally at 90-meter resolution the average building height and volume based on the 2012 Tandem X digital elevation model, hence facilitating unprecedented environmental, socioeconomic, and climatological analysis. In the 3D representation here, the high-rise buildings in the central district of Dar es Salaam emerge quite clearly, as well as those located along the major road connecting it to the airport, which is the black dot, the black spot in the middle of the image here. Next, please. So far, different organizations had the chance to work with the WSF products, even as champion users before their official release, and the feedback that we received is extremely positive. As key example, let me cite the UN Habitat colleagues who exploited the WSF 2019 population for automatically calculating SDG 11.2.1, or the South African Space Agency, which employed the WSF 19 for analyzing settlement informality, and the World Bank, which, among others, has employed the WSF evolution to compute globally the share of settlement extent over time exposed to different flood risk level. Next, please. So the WSF is compliant with the FAIR principle and hopefully completely will become part of the EO Toolkit that we are discussing here. And the WSF 2015 is openly available since last year, while both the WSF Evolution and the WSF 19 have been released fresh from the oven just a couple of weeks ago on 11th November. And to this purpose, if you're interested, you can still find the related press release on the ESA website in the homepage. And of course, all three layers are accessible for free for browsing and downloading at the moment on DLR's Earth Observation Center GeoService, and the link is the one that you see there at the bottom. And last slide, please. So presently, concerning the other three products, the WSF 2019 imperviousness is undergoing quality assessment. The population layer is being completing in these days, whereas the WSF3d is completed. We need the last clearance before making it available, but hopefully all three products shall be available most likely in early 2022. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Wonderful, thank you. Wonderful, thank you very much, Mattia, for this great and swift presentation. Let's see, I think we have a question for you. Top-down global gridded population data have been shown to vastly underestimate the population of informal settlements. How meaningful is their inclusion in hazard applications when they might propagate systematic bias by masking these communities? Any brief comments?
Well, I mean, in our case, we are also including the imperviousness as a means for weighting this. So it's not purely based in the settlement extent, and we are trying to include the land use and especially also the 3D. So already, I mean, these approaches are suboptimal, we know, but already trying to include some additional information at the beginning should hopefully bring us to have better results.
Thank you very much, Mattia. If you have more questions for Mattia, please include them in the chat. I also noted that you mentioned that you've started the validation process, and I know that there have been discussions around sharing validation data sets also as part of the PopGrid data collaborative that Cascade shared earlier in his presentation. So hopefully this will be a continuing discussion within the community. Thank you very much. And now we'll transfer to the last presentation, and we are, I think we're doing relatively well on time. So we'll go over to Monica Kufer from ITC at the University of Twente. And so Monica is an assistant professor at the faculty ITC, University of Twente. and she is co-chairing a network on deprivation area mapping, idea maps, and is also working on 2 research projects, slum map and account. She's also been involved from the beginning and has been contributing and leading many efforts within the EU Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. Monica, over to you.
Thanks, Archie. And what I will do today or now, I will try to highlight you, show you of how some of the data which are available in the EU SDG toolkit can be related to SDG 11.1.1 monitoring, the SDG which is normally referred as slums, informal settlements, and inadequate housing. Can you go please to the next slide? I think that's something we can skip, as Archie introduced nicely my background. So what we see is that we see massive urbanization rates, and this amount of, or the majority of this urbanization rate will will happen in low and mid-income country cities. And also the majority will happen in areas which we prefer to refer as deprived urban areas, areas which you normally know as slums or informal settlements. But we see that data are typically missing on those areas. So they are either unavailable, they are very patchy, meaning partially available, or often very dated. What has been also just before discussed, that population estimates are having very high uncertainties in these areas. And often with some of the experiments we did, capturing sometimes only 10% of the population which is really living in this area, which has to do with very high densities, living under very tiny spaces of building structures, which might be 10 or 20 square meter only. Next, please. What we advocate within idea maps and the framework which I will present in the next slide is that we need to add the level of beyond the slum household definition, also an understanding of deprived urban areas as an area level understanding. And what you see on these examples, and looking now to the example C, is that the situation is often very complex. You might find non-slum households in deprived areas, or on the example B, on a rooftop, a slum household in a non-deprived area. So the situation is very complex, and slums are not equal, or slum household is not equal to a deprived urban area. Next. This is a concept we have been trying to combine different domains of deprivation, in total 9 domains of deprivation, at 3 different scales. So capturing also the household level deprivation, which is normally focusing when we talk about slum households, but adding also aspects of area level deprivation, for example, aspects of hazard or unplanned urbanization, but also seeing how an area is connected with the rest of the city, and understanding this kind of complexity of deprivation. This indicator framework is also allowing to model deprivation in terms of gridded maps of deprivation, which are essential, for example, to feed into other models like hazard models or population models to improve those models. If you click next, I hope some boxes will appear. So I will show you now with 2 examples how data which are presently available as part of the EU SDG toolkit can allow modeling aspects of this deprivation framework, focusing on the unplanned urbanization, where you see a lot of the indicators relate to building and build-up density, build-up patterns, and the infrastructure domain, where a lot of the indicators relate to how areas are connected with the rest of the city, like street lights or other infrastructure. If you go please to next. So this is an example on how build-up or building maps, building footprint maps extracted from high-resolution imagery, what we are presently working on, also with the use of openly accessible RGB images, can help us to capture one aspect of deprivation, which is the unplanned deprivation, where you see on the right an example of a very congested urban area in Nairobi in Kenya as compared to a very planned urban area. And this kind of proxies can help us to capture one aspect of deprivation. If you go to next, please. So this is the example of the city of Khartoum in Sudan, and referring to what was just presented before, the World Settlement Footprint Layer, showing how the city has been dramatically growing and expanding in the evolution layer, a data set which is also available. And if you press now next, then we see how an area which is delineated with this red boundary, which is one of the informal areas which has been emerging from an IDP camps, is poorly connected with the rest of the city in terms of nightlight. And being very dark in terms of the nightlights. So nightlights are in principle a really interesting indicator, with the call also maybe to people like at ESA, maybe we need more high resolution nightlight sensors to support such analysis. Next, please. So what we are also working on are further examples of upcoming Earth observation-based indicators that capture other aspects of deprivation, like road accessibility, roofing materials, the variation of roofing surfaces, hazards, open space, etc. And if you click on the next slide, I will show you an example of a colleague who's also in the room, Stefanos, on the waste mapping done within Slum Map project we are working on, showing how Earth observation images can allow us to detect the accumulation of waste, which is an enormous environmental and health issue, and particularly if flooding occurs, the whole waste is flooding through the settlement, in principle contaminating all people and particularly also children. And we can produce very quickly updates of the accumulation of waste, and this data set has been also validated with community-based groups in Nairobi. Next, please. So I thank you, and I'm super happy if you are interested in the work and would like to share your experience and also join us with the toolkit and connect with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. I think we have time for perhaps one question. I wonder if you and perhaps others on the panel do want to elaborate a bit more or in response to Stefanos' question regarding some difficulties in estimating population, especially in areas of informal settlements. So do you want to offer some thoughts, Monica, to that?
Yes, I can continue on this because it's an important issue, and that's what we also looked in across city. Also, my colleague Dana, she has been validating several population layer, and they're really poorly capturing the high density, and which has to do with also the question on that we need to use and include bottom-up models that are trained with local data that capture the high density, because the problem is when you start with existing population models, which are often only trained with build-up versus non-build-up, so a lot of the population is allocated actually to non-residential area, which is then missing in the residential areas. So what was told before, okay, if you improve the population model by adding residential, then already you improve the allocation to residential areas, but you need to add the socioeconomic differences that you in the deprived urban areas, you have much more people living on the same built-up surface as compared to formal areas, because you typically have like a structure which is maybe 20 square meter and maybe 5-6 people live under this roof. And you need to find models that account for this very different densities in such areas. And only if you build such models, you will capture much better. And if you add information like a layer of deprivation to a population model, then you would be able to better capture these high densities. But I'm now giving the word to others.
Thank you very much, Monica. I think does someone else want to offer maybe one quick sentence? I see Thomas, please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to mention also that there's two components. On the one hand, there's the Earth observation component, but on the other side, there's also the census component. So very often already here is a big problem because sometimes for political and other reasons, they don't want these people to be counted properly. So there we often see the problem that we detect settlement structures, but the census says nobody's living here. So that's just another reason for this. And I think really there we need to see also in how far we can go really down to this very detailed level, or if we really have to stay at a somewhat aggregate level. But for sure, I think what is important is this combination of different sources that also go beyond Earth observation data.
Great, thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, I'll invite the rest of the speakers to offer thoughts in writing, and there may be a couple of additional questions that you can respond to in writing. And I'll invite now Dennis Mwaniki from UN Habitat to join me to provide some concluding remarks for our session. So Dennis, are you here with us?
Yes, Aji, and apologies, my camera seems to have jumped. It's not connecting anymore.
No worries. Please, would love to hear from you some concluding remarks. And yep.
Okay. Thank you. So for me, is first to thank everyone who has contributed to this session. Very interesting session, very interesting discussions, and maybe to highlight a few things that have come, at least I've taken note as action areas, at least from the first panel, was the aspect for translation of the toolkit to different languages. I really like that. We need to communicate to all audiences. That's something I know within the steering committee, that's something that we need to discuss, but also the linkages between the data aspects, but also the policy components. That's another important aspect that I know we are already in discussions on those components, and Rafael has been really pushing us also to go in that direction. The second part of the panel, as usual, very interesting data sets. I really always, every time I am listening to some of the speakers, I'm always amazed at the ever-increasing quality resolution of data sets coming at the global level. And this is important because we are always striving to measure things at a higher resolution. And this really is driving towards the right direction. So really want to applaud everyone and all the major work that everyone is doing. For this is really significantly going to contribute to how we understand our human settlements going forward. The one thing perhaps I want to highlight here is the linkage always between the global and local. I know Monica and Ifang somehow alluded to this, that the global data sets are really great. At least what we have is continuously becoming well validated, getting high resolution quality. But at the local level, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to also improve this data. I think also factoring in locally produced data. And I know there's a lot of partnerships and work going on between the different event speakers. Some of the speakers in the session, I know we are working with them on different aspects, including city definition, harmonization. These are things that are really, really important. So for me, it's really to appreciate all the great work. This is significantly and majorly contributing to the work that we do as UN Habitat, but also the work that countries are doing, and especially the monitoring requirements. There is a huge demand and requirement for member states to report on a lot of SDGs, a lot of indicators within the new urban agenda. And what we've seen, Earth observation, geospatial information, is really significantly contributing to reduction in the kind of effort required. They are making this much more easier to get data, to extract information, but also to relate things to space, which for us, this is always important for linking all this data to also actions and recommendations. So again, finally, to just thank you everyone, and it's really been a great panel. I really enjoyed myself. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And on my behalf as well, I want to thank, first of all of our panelists and speakers and meeting organizers and hosts. We really appreciate your hard work and contributions. I want to thank the broader EU Toolkit community and for your continuing contributions, and recognize these contributions of over 30 organizations that are working with us across sectors and also across regions. We are looking forward to working further together and with additional members from the GEO community and the GEO Work program to help really bring this knowledge, resource, and activities to more of the hands of cities and local communities, especially also given the adoption of sustainable cities and human settlements or resilient cities and human settlements as the fourth engagement priority for GEO. And so with that, I thank you, Dennis, also for the great summary of the panel. And I want to invite colleagues that are in the audience to visit the EU Toolkit portal and to let us know if you'd like to be part of the community, and also if you have additional use cases or data sets and tools that you'd like to contribute. And with that, we will conclude the event for today. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.